Imagine this. The color of the sky has changed. The ground is shaking. The sound of swords suddenly stops. The only thing a soldier hears is heavy, rhythmic footsteps. These are not human footsteps, not even a horse. The earth trembles, dust rises, and in front of you appears a huge shadow. For a moment you ask yourself, what is that? A weapon or a living creature? Is it an animal or a moving fortress? How do you even fight something like this? As the shadow comes closer, you finally see it. It is an elephant, but not an ordinary elephant. Spears are tied to its tusks. Armored warriors stand on its back. Its body is covered in iron. Its forehead is painted for war. You are just a soldier. Your hands start shaking. Your sword suddenly looks very small. And another question strikes your mind. If I hit this giant, will it even feel pain? Or will it simply walk over me? The men beside you begin to run. No one wants to be a hero anymore. Everyone is afraid of being crushed, because this creature is as tall as a wall, as heavy as iron, spreading fear just by existing, and most of all, it looks impossible to stop. Now think for a second. What happened to the mind of the first ancient soldier who saw this? Did the elephant win the battle before it even began? In war, is victory about strength or about fear? This video will search for those answers. Together we will discover how elephants were turned into weapons who used them in war, how they were trained, how the Romans learned to defeat them, and the hardest question of all, who dragged these gentle giants into human wars? And why? Maybe this story isn't just about armies and generals. Maybe it is really about us. When humans search for power, who pays the price? Has civilization advanced, or have our weapons simply changed? Stay until the end, because this is the beginning of war elephants, the living tanks of the ancient battlefield. War elephants did not simply appear on battlefields. They were selected, trained, armored, fed, transported, and controlled like living machines. But unlike machines, they had emotions, fear, pain, and memories. So how did humans turn such gentle giants into weapons? First, elephants were carefully chosen. Commanders didn't want small or weak animals. They wanted males, larger and more aggressive. Tall, shoulder-height, strong tusks, calm enough to obey, wild enough to intimidate. Young elephants were often captured from the wild. Sometimes whole herds were surrounded and driven into pits. The strongest were kept. The rest were often released, or not so lucky. Then came the hardest part, breaking the will of an animal that could crush you in a second. Trainers used food rewards, repeated commands, constant human contact, sometimes pain and chains. Slowly, the elephant learned two things: the trainer's voice, the reality that there was no escape. This trainer, when called a mahout, became the elephant's world. He fed it, he washed it, he guided it, and in war, he commanded life or death. The elephant did not obey the army. It obeyed one man sitting behind its ears. Next came desensitization to fear. War is chaos. Screaming soldiers, drums, fire, arrows, blood. No wild animal is naturally prepared for this. So elephants were trained inside controlled chaos. Fire was lit around them. Shields were clashed beside them. War cries were shouted in their ears. The message was simple: do not panic. Move forward. Their bodies were then turned into moving fortresses. Craftsmen built iron plates for the head and sides, leather armor for the trunk, protective cloth against arrows, sharp blades for the tusks. On their backs, a tower was mounted, a wooden platform, ropes tightened, sometimes surrounded by shields. On that platform stood archers, javelin throwers, banner carriers. An elephant no longer carried grass and water. It carried men, weapons, and fear. But there was a darker side commanders rarely admitted. Elephants were also trained to kill. They were encouraged to trample soldiers, crush shields, rip through formations, throw people into the air, destroy chariots. To make them more terrifying, some armies even painted them with bright colors, attached bells and flags, covered them in polished armor. A charging elephant was not just a body. It was a psychological storm. However, generals also prepared for the moment when things went wrong. Because if an elephant panicked, it did not care who was friend or enemy. So mahouts were given a final tool, a short, sharp blade. Behind the elephant's ear is a small point, a fatal nerve center. If the elephant lost control, trampled its own army, could not be stopped. The mahout had one duty: kill the very animal that trusted him. This was the cruel contract of war. Humans created living weapons, and when those weapons broke, humans destroyed them. Today we remember generals and kings, but on every battlefield of the ancient world stood another army, an army of animals that did not choose to fight. When people speak about war elephants, one name rises above all others: Hannibal Barca. He was not just a general, he was a strategist who tried to break the greatest power of his age, Rome. And he chose to do it in a way no one expected. Hannibal grew up with war. As a child, his father made him swear an oath that he would never be a friend of Rome. That promise shaped his life. But attacking Rome was not easy. The Romans commanded the sea. Their navy controlled the Mediterranean. So Hannibal made a decision that sounded insane. He would not sail to Italy. He would walk to it, and he would not walk alone. He would bring tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry supplies, and war elephants. His path led across one of the most dangerous places in the ancient world: the Alps, high mountains, snowstorms, freezing winds, narrow, deadly cliffs. The journey was a nightmare. Men slipped and fell into ravines. Horses died. Rocks collapsed under the weight of marching feet. Avalanches roared without warning. And the elephants? They struggled too. Their feet bled on sharp ice. Cold air burned in their lungs. Some fell and never stood up again. But the ones who survived did something unbelievable. They walked out of the mountains into Italy. Imagine the moment. Roman scouts expect an army. They do not expect elephants walking out of snow and clouds. For the Roman soldier, it was like seeing monsters appear from another world. Hannibal understood something powerful. Before you defeat an army, defeat its courage. In battle after battle, he used elephants not just as weapons, but as fear itself. At Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, and most famously at Cannae, he surrounded Roman armies. He crushed their formations. He showed the world that Rome could bleed. But Hannibal was not cruel for sport. Ancient writers describe him as disciplined, brilliant, terrifying to his enemies, inspiring to his soldiers. He slept on the ground with his men. He marched beside them. He shared their hunger and danger. To his troops, he was not just a commander. He was the man who had led them through impossible mountains and into the heart of their enemy's land. Yet Hannibal's story is also tragic. He defeated Rome again and again, but he could not destroy Rome. No reinforcements came from his homeland. Years passed. Allies abandoned him. Rome adapted. Rome survived. In the end, Hannibal did not die in glory on a battlefield. He died far from home, hunted, refusing to be captured. But his legacy remains. He is remembered as the man who crossed the Alps with elephants, the general, who terrified Rome, a mind so brilliant that modern military academies still study him. And every time we speak about war, elephants, his shadow stands beside them. Because Hannibal proved something the world would never forget. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not steel, but imagination, courage, and the willingness to attempt the impossible. At first, Rome feared war elephants. They were loud. They were massive. They were unlike anything Roman soldiers had ever faced. An elephant didn't just kill a man. It broke formations, smashed shields, and destroyed morale before the battle had even begun. The first time the Romans faced them, their lines collapsed in panic. But Rome had a talent. Rome learned. Rome watched, recorded, experimented, and adapted. They understood a simple truth. You don't defeat an elephant with strength. You defeat it with understanding. So the Romans began to ask questions. What frightens an elephant? What wounds it? How does it move? How do you survive when it charges straight at you? From those questions, new tactics were born. First, they changed their formations. Instead of tight squares, they created corridors, open lanes inside the army. When elephants charged, Romans did not meet them head-on. They opened the formation. The elephant rushed into empty space instead of crashing into a wall of shields. Once the animal was inside, Roman soldiers attacked its sides where its armor was weakest. Some threw javelins, others struck legs to unbalance it. But the goal was not always to kill the elephant. Often the goal was simpler: make it panic. Because a panicking elephant did something terrifying to its own side. It turned around. It ran back through the army that had sent it forward. It crushed friendly soldiers. It tore through cavalry. It smashed chariots. Roman commanders knew this and used it. They created noise, trumpets, horns, drums. They used fire, torches, and burning pitch. They spread sharp stakes across the ground to wound tender feet. An elephant may be strong, but it is still a living, feeling creature. It fears pain. It fears confusion. It fears losing control. The Romans learned to attack the mind of the elephant, not just the body. Weapons were adapted as well. They built heavier javelins. Some were designed to stick into the elephant's skin and hang, creating constant pain and panic. Archers aimed for eyes. Slingers targeted the trunk, the elephant's most sensitive part, and Rome studied the men who rode them too. If you strike the mahout, the elephant's driver, the animal becomes uncontrollable. The Romans watched for him, high on the elephant's neck, and targeted him whenever they could. Slowly, the balance changed. Elephants went from being invincible monsters to dangerous but manageable threats. At the Battle of Zama, against Hannibal himself, the Romans finally proved it. They opened lanes. They blew horns. The elephants ran forward and then ran past the Roman lines, not through them. The terrifying living tanks of the ancient world were turned aside by discipline and calm thinking. Rome had overcome fear, and once the fear was gone, the power of the elephant was never the same again. Yet the Romans also learned something deeper. They realized an elephant is not a demon or a machine. It is a living creature forced into war. In their writings, some Roman commanders wrote with respect for its strength, for its intelligence, for its tragedy. Because in the end, the story of Rome versus the war elephant is not just about tactics. It is about a civilization discovering that courage defeats fear, discipline defeats chaos, and knowledge defeats anything that looks unstoppable. Even a 6-ton giant walking through the smoke of battle. War elephants were not born as weapons. A wild elephant does not naturally know how to charge into battle, crush formations, or stand calmly in front of arrows and fire. Everything it did in war was taught, step by step. So how did humans turn one of the gentlest animals on Earth into a tool of war? The process happened in 3 main stages: capture and breaking the will obedience, and bond with the trainer training for noise, chaos, and battle. And each stage was both a skill and a cruelty. 1. Capture and the breaking of the will. Most war elephants were taken from the wild. Large pits were dug, wooden traps were built, entire herds were driven into narrow areas. From there, the biggest and strongest elephants were chosen. The others were sometimes released and sometimes not. After capture, an elephant was usually kept alone. This was intentional. Elephants are deeply social animals. They live in families and herds. To separate one from its group caused psychological collapse. At that moment, the only living being the elephant now saw every day was the trainer, the mahout. The mahout fed it, washed it, spoke to it, touched it, stayed near it. But this was not only kindness. There was one goal. The elephant must not escape. The elephant must obey. Chains were used. Ropes were used. Long, exhausting days of training began. At first, the elephant was trained like a living vehicle. Sit, stand, turn, stop, walk backward. Commands were repeated again and again in the same tone of voice. In battle, there is no time for gestures. The elephant had to obey sound alone. 2. The bond. Mahout and elephant as one being. The mahout did not simply train the elephant. He lived with it. He sometimes slept beside it. He cared for it when it was sick. He climbed on its neck every day. In war, there was only one human being the elephant truly listened to, the man sitting behind its ears. The mahout taught, turn left, turn right, charge forward, hold position, trample the enemy. The elephant did not obey the army, it obeyed one voice. That is why ancient people said, when you control the mahout, you control the elephant. It was not simply training, it was emotional conditioning. 3. Training the mind for chaos, noise, fire, fear. The most brutal part came next. War is not quiet. There are screaming men, drums, horns, arrows, flying blood fire, and thick smoke. No wild animal is naturally ready for this. So elephants were forced to get used to chaos. Around them, soldiers smashed shields together, torches burned, war cries echoed, horses panicked and neighed. The lesson was simple. Even when afraid, move forward. Because a panicked elephant was more dangerous than an enemy army. If it turned around and ran back, it would crush its own soldiers. So elephants were trained not to flee from fear, but to advance through it. This was not just physical training. It was psychological reshaping of a living being. 4. Armor, weapons, and combat behavior. Once obedient, the elephants were turned into moving fortresses. Armor was built for them, metal plates for the head leather or bronze for the body cloth, protection against arrows, knives, or spears tied to tusks. Then came combat practice. They were trained to break shield walls, smash chariots, push through tight formations, trample enemies lying on the ground. Some were even trained to grab people with their trunks and throw them. To make them more terrifying, armies often painted elephants in bright colors, attached bells and banners, polished their armor so it shone in the sun. A charging elephant was not just an animal, it was a psychological weapon. 5. The darkest command, known only to the mahout. There was one final, tragic part of training. What if the elephant lost control? What if it panicked, ran the wrong way, or began crushing its own army? The mahout was given a short dagger. Behind the elephant's ear lies a small vulnerable point, a place where a single, deep strike can kill it instantly. If the elephant became uncontrollable, the mahout had only one duty, to kill the same animal that trusted him. He was the elephant's friend, caregiver, guide, and sometimes its executioner. This was the cruel contract of ancient war. Conclusion. So the path of a war elephant was this: taken from the forest, separated from its family, its will broken, its mind conditioned, its body armored, its fear turned into weapon. But through all of this, one fact never changed. The elephant did not understand empire. It did not understand conquest or politics. Humans chose war. Elephants were simply forced to follow. Their names are rarely written in history books, but their footprints remain on every ancient battlefield.